First of all, a bit of gratitude. Thank you for having me. And I now feel like a bad dad because I've got no photos of my children. So I was thinking, can I change the slides again? But I think Tom would get even more annoyed with me. So we're hopefully, I don't think we're going to answer this question, but I'm going to explain why we're not going to answer this question. But in order to sort of explain why am I authorised to talk about this, so just a show of hands, who remembers the first time, some of you are too young to remember this, but who remembers the first time you phoned up a call centre and they said, what's your postcode? And then they read out your address and you were like, wow, how did you do that? So I used to work in database marketing before internet marketing was even a thing, where we used to sell people postcodes. So that was a company called QAS. We then sold that business to Experian. And then nowadays they call that AI. And it was all about efficiency and then using data to help people make better decisions. So I've been doing this a long time. Communicator was then email, and that was email when it was basically just spam. And then we got into transactional email and understanding all of that. And then I got into the wonderful world of search. So I remember I was on a ski lift and someone said, well, what's SEO? And I'm like, I don't know, let's find out. And then I joined Search Laboratory and we built that business. And then Summit, anybody remember Summit Media? We were famous for two things. Yeah? Anybody know what those two things were? We set the business up in a prison. Yeah? So I've got fascinating stories about rehabilitating prisoners and what lives we changed doing that. And Argos wasn't our only client, but was certainly our biggest client. And we had Argos for 13 years, which in retaining a client. And we were responsible for getting rid of the Argos catalogue. I'm sorry. Right? Yeah. So all those kids, when you used to colour in, I want that. You can't do that anymore. But what was interesting when we were building Argos spent, when I was there, £2 million a month on Google Ads. They're one of the biggest spenders. And we were trying to help them work out exactly where to spend their money. So we did this knowledge transfer partnership with Durham University, Dr. Wolf, and we were like, can we predict where to spend the money? And he's like, well, yeah, if we've got the right data, we can do this and we can do that. And we built this machine to predict where to spend your money on Google Ads. And it was phenomenal. And I'm like, let's turn that into a thing and sell it as software to other people. And I'd come back to the data science team and they'd go, not enough data. And we needed £2 million spend, 85,000 products, 800 stores for this thing to work. But in the back of my mind, I always had this itch that wouldn't it be great if we had a machine like that could work for everybody? So just sort of hold that thought, and that'll talk to where we've got to today. So Jay is going to cycle around the world. She just doesn't know this yet. And you've missed the hard bit, but you can go back and do it again. We cycled across the Alps. So I set up a business when I exited from Search Labs that's helping people cycle from London to Sydney over 25 years. I do tend to get more excited about this than I do about AI and digital marketing. So if you want to talk to me about cycling later. And the reason that's important is we are raising money for a charity in Uganda called One More Child, where we look after 280 children. We clothe, feed, educate all of them, and we raise about £250,000 a year just from 2 bike rides. One of them was 2 weeks ago, which unfortunately Jay was busy doing something else. But it's our whole thing. And on that bike ride, about 10 years ago, I was cycling between Paris and Geneva, and I would run out of steam. I'm not a natural cyclist. I'm a rugby player. And this guy comes past me and goes, you all right? And I'm like, no, I'm dying. And there's like this headwind. I'm all on my own. And he goes, I'll just sit on my wheel and I'll get you there. Have some food. I hadn't eaten enough food. There's a thing in cycling called bonking. And I'd bonked, basically. And he got me there. And then I got to know this guy really well. Anyway, it turns out he was the founder of Skyscanner. And he had invented Skyscanner. He'd invented the algorithm to make Skyscanner work. Anyway, we became great friends. I then exited from Summit Media, and he goes, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, I want to build this thing that engages people to predict where to spend their money online. We sort of did it for Argos, but I want to do it for everybody else. And he's like, right, well, I'll do that with you. So I set this business up with the founder of Skyscanner, and he's like, well, we've got to raise money for the charity bike ride that we met, so we'll create a thing. So we've named our software after the gentleman who runs the charity, who's called Bosco. So we aren't trying to tap you up for charity donations, but Jay did say you could come and scan our barcode. The money goes direct to help change children's lives in Uganda. £600 changes one person's life for a whole year. So in the big scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money. So that's me, and now I'm going to get on to what we do. So We have a marketing and AI reporting and measurement platform called ASK BOSCO. So I agree with everything everybody's already said, by the way. I'm not going to contradict anything. This is hugely important. And measurement is, you need to be measuring everything, and it's hard. Like, this stuff's really hard. What we do is we help you connect all your data into one place. We then use some clever AI and machine learning, ultimately to help you answer the questions your team have, your bosses have, enable you to have a more interesting and informed conversation with your agency. And we do that in 4 ways. So we help you connect all your data into one place. Super easy. My biggest thing was anybody's got to be able to use this thing. We don't want to raise a ticket with IT. We then give you some wonderful AI-driven reports so you can just ask Bosco questions. How much did we sell on Facebook last week? And it gives you the answers. And then we benchmark you against your peers. But then we also, it's the so what question, right? A lot of times people go, I get sent a dashboard, I get sent a weekly report, and it's like, well, what are we going to do next? And what we want to do is predict where to spend your money next based on your objectives. So that's what we do, but we're not here to talk about, we're here to talk about the attribution problem. Okay, so somebody last night said, this is a bit like that John Wanamaker thing last night. So I said, oh yeah, I often use that in my slides. And I said to Tom, Tom, can I change my slides? And he goes, oh, if you really must. So somebody in the audience said we should put this slide in. So thank you and credit for that. But this is part of the problem. Right? And this was in 1861. People didn't know what they were doing with marketing. And I think it got easier, and I think, as everybody said now, it's going to get harder again, right? And I think this is what the problem is because we've had it relatively easy. We could spend £1, we could make £10, and we could track it end to end, and it was super easy. But with the changes in privacy, it's becoming really hard. So, and the reason is we've got too much data. I know we're all saying we want more data, but I suppose the bit is we need to know which bits of data do we actually need to be using, and do we have permission to use? There is a bit of a lack of trust, both with the platforms and with the retailers, and we need to rebuild that trust, right? Who thinks Alexa's listening all the time, right? I think she is, right? And we've been testing it. I'll say something, and then a Facebook ad will appear, and I've never searched it. They are listening, right? Not to be, Google's a profit-making business, but if you look at the costs, even if you like, I'd suggest if you go and look at the increasing cost of your brand terms over the last 2 years, the average is 25 to 30% increase on your own brand terms. It's getting more expensive, right? Google wants to grow their business. There's less demand, so the cost of the auction has to go up, which I get. But how do we help you stop spending more money in those places? And it's really hard to measure all this stuff, as we've talked about, and forecast. So, as with all things, I thought, well, I'll ask ChatGPT, right? What is the definition of attribution? Because that's what we all do now. I'm a bit disappointed. I thought when ChatGPT came along, people would stop using Google so much and people just start. And I don't think we've seen that drop off. I thought it would be a bigger thing. So I thought I'd ask ChatGPT. So here's me. I'm dyslexic, so if you see any spelling mistakes, that's what's going on. We should have had some music for this bit. Actually, we should make it bigger. Basically, what it's saying is it's about assigning the right recognition to the right touch points that contributed in the customer journey. And I think, going back to the Red Boots example, there's different things that we're doing, but most people, not if you work with launch, but most digital marketers might still be on a last click wins or a last non-direct click. And is that actually the true representation of which marketing channel generated that sale? Right? And that's what we're going to sort of get into and discuss. And then, but what about this guy? It's not MMM. Or when I'm talking about this, it's not NMM either. Right? So the difference, which is really important, marketing mix modelling is really good. It's also really expensive and takes lots of clever people a long time to do, and you have to look back at a huge amount of data. I think through advances in technology with Google, Facebook, people like us, you're going to get closer to MMM out of a box soon. Right? What we do isn't that yet, but what we are going to talk about is attribution, which can give you some really good tactical things which you can then change how you think about your marketing journey. And that's the important thing, it's how you think about it. Okay, so I thought I'd just take you on a bit of a, we've talked a lot about history. I haven't got pictures of my kids, I've got a really boring timeline of the history of the internet. So I'm feeling a bit creatively backwards here. So 1980 it all started. Then we got the World Wide Web in 89. Some of you may not have even been born in 89 in this room. Then we started looking at clickable banners. Then we started Google. I remember the first time I searched on Google, it was just a white box, and everybody's like, where's all the pop-ups, like on Ask Jeeves or on Lycos? All right? And then we've been through this evolution. I think, there we go, 2008 GDPR. Everybody thought that when the banners came up, that was going to be the end of the internet. I remember sitting in meetings, what's going to happen? Nobody's going to buy anything. That didn't happen. I think it was the same with consent mode more recently. Everybody was like, that's going to be... But I do agree with Ian. The implications of not implementing that properly are really high. Not only will you lose your tracking, but you'll lose the confidence of your customers. So my team think I look like him. I think that's quite offensive. Right? So... I think it's just because we've both got glasses, right? And my teeth aren't that wonky either. Right, so quick quiz. Anybody know that logo? Anybody who's been around? Googlers should know it. Double click. Right, prize for everybody who said box of chocolates for people who said double click. So Google double click basically invented like proper tracking. And it was like a thing. So much so Google bought them. And that is the foundations of what we now have. And that's the old, I've got an old laptop bag that has that logo on it. It's still one of my favourite little bags. But that was the foundation. And Google Analytics has been free and super helpful and super good for years. And I think that's part of the problem of where we're at now, is because we've had this free, amazing platform that tracked everything, and now not everything is trackable, we're like, well, what do you mean you've spent a load of money and you can't prove where it's come from? And then 2018, we sort of had the cookies with the GDPR. This is then a big issue, right? This was a massive issue, right? So what happened in 2021? iOS 14. I remember I had people phoning up going, does Facebook just not work anymore? And I'm like, no, I think still people are on Facebook, and I still think they're looking at your ads. We just can't prove it anymore. Well, we're not going to spend on Facebook anymore then. I'm like, no, but I still think it was doing what it was doing last month, but we'll just have to work it out. So there's a massive loss in visibility because of the consent changes that have been made in this process. And I think some of this is about educating your businesses, your teams, and your senior stakeholders. Because I think sometimes it's because it was always possible, they're like, well, why is it not possible now? Okay, so it is reassuring hearing Google saying, this is hard. You've got to join it all up and you won't have everything. This is a screenshot from ASK BOSCO. This is the difference. Have I got a pointer here? Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, a little pointer. So this is traffic. This is what Meta's saying, and then that's what analytics is saying. Right, this is the same website with exactly the same stuff, and it's like, well, how do we explain that? Right, and this is a reasonably well set up, well tagged, well tracked site. Right, but it's a massive difference. Right, and then you've got to decide, well, which platform do we trust? So are we going to take our conversions from Meta and optimize to that, or are we going to take our conversions from GA4 and optimize to that? Or are we going to come up with something in between? Right, and it's hard. And it's hard for the team at launch, and it's hard for you as clients to understand why and how are we making these decisions on where we spend our budgets. So this is some of the pretty graphs that you get in ASK BOSCO. But this is a hard puzzle to solve. I did used to have a slot machine, but everybody said it had negative connotations with gambling. Right? But I liked your gambling. I think I should change the slide again. So the key things you need to think about, right? So are we going to send the slides around afterwards? Yeah, right. So you don't need to write this down, but key things, how many steps are in your customer journey? You may not need an attribution model, right? Everybody's like, oh, attribution. You might not need it. If you sell something that's somebody comes on a website, it's relatively low cost, instant gratification, you might not need an attribution model. Right, so how many steps are in your journey? Have you actually measured that? And I'm going to show you sort of some ways of how to do that. And then I suppose, which platforms are they moving between? Years ago, we used to have the problem, multiple people, one computer, right? So you'd all share a laptop in the house, right? And then the problem then was trying to work out who was using thing. And it used to be, look, our family Amazon account was, I'd get people like you want to buy Davina's workout video. And I'm like, no, they don't. Right? We're just using the same computer. So which platform and who is it? And it's like, what bits can or can't we actually measure? And then this is the key one, which we're going to talk about. Who do you need to get buy-in that changing the way you measure everything is a good idea? Right? And that's normally where it falls down and where it's hard. Because you would go, yeah, this makes complete sense. We need to attribute everything correctly. And then you go to the board and you say, well, actually, we've spent this much money on Facebook, we've spent this much money on Google, and our RoAS has all changed. And they'll go, well, that doesn't make any sense. I want to do that. I want to go back to how it was. We can't go back to how it was. And I think they're the tough conversations that you're going to have. So this is your sort of typical funnel of marketing. I think people are going to be talking a bit more about this sort of brand bit later and this consideration. I think we've all got addicted to the bottom of the funnel and chasing people. And that's why it's getting expensive. And that's why the platforms can charge us more money. Because we're all fighting over this last click at the bottom of the funnel. Right, well, how could we get it before it even, so they don't even do a search. They just buy into our brand, and when they're ready, they come and look at our website and buy stuff. Then these are all the different channels that we might use. And again, so we're collecting data in multiple different places about multiple different events, and this then gets really complicated. Right, and then some people go, it's just too hard. We'll go back to last non-direct click because that's been working and we'll just keep doing that. Most people we talk to aren't using an attribution model. Most people want to, but then it becomes too hard and it just goes to the bottom of the list again. Right? You can unlock, I'm going to show you, so is RoAS dead? Not necessarily. We can show you how to unlock more RoAS by understanding your customers more. So a better question, I think, with understanding attribution is, I don't just necessarily want to understand how my customers are buying. I want to understand how my most valuable, most loyal customers are buying, and then I want to go find more of those. Right? That's really the power of what you could do here. So this could be a sort of typical, somebody clicks on a thing there, they then come back organically, they then get retargeted for the red boots because they didn't buy them, and then they click, and then they go away, and then they remember they need to buy them, and then they do a paid search, red boots, and they click and they buy. Paid search probably gets all the recognition, right? But there's other people who might determine they need some recognition, and you need to think about the full customer journey, right? The challenge with this is there's not all your customers are the same, not all your products are the same, and this is really complicated. And that's, again, why people go, oh, this is going to be really hard. So the question I would ask you first is, do you actually need an attribution model, right? You may not. So this is going to get a bit technical, and so actually I haven't introduced Rosie. Rosie, put your hand up. Rosie is our lead data scientist. She has a PhD in cosmic dust. She's literally a rocket scientist. And when she's not doing that, before she worked for us, she used to predict the demand for trains, and now she predicts the demand for clicks. So if you've got any really hard questions about anything I'm talking about, go find Rosie, and she will answer them for you. So here, this is what you need to look at for your customer journeys. Right? You need to get to this data. And so in this scenario, if we put in an attribution model, 41% of sales will be affected on which channel gets credit. So, and 91% have more than 4 steps. So yes, the answer is this one, we probably should do an attribution model. And in that scenario, we had to then go explain to the board how and where you spend your money is now different, and how we report on that is different. And that's really the fundamental shift, because everybody's been used to spending £1 and getting £10 back. And now we've got to look at it different. Right, this is not the good news you wanted. There is no right answer to any of this. It's looking for the least wrong answer. Unless you've got one customer who buys the same thing in the same way all the time, which probably means you don't have a very good business, there isn't a sort of perfect fit for any of this. So What we're trying to do is find the best fit or the least wrong, if that makes sense, and the one that then makes sense to your business or makes sense to your future optimization or your planning, and one that you can get the senior leadership behind, right? These are some of the more common ones, and so this is the typical one. Most people will be like last click, right? Last non-direct click. Or actually, if you're in sort of programmatic or display or TV, it'd be like, no, first click gets all the credit. Or it's last non-direct, or everybody gets a fair share, right? Or actually over time, that did a little bit, but then it goes that way. This is the more common, and then there's loads of different versions of this. You've got the U shape, you've got the J shape, you've got the reverse J shape, and there's loads of different versions of all these different models. So we talked about tracking, right? So the first thing you need to do, not only get your consent mode tracking set up, you need to make sure you've got everything going into the same place, right? And often these platforms are like walled gardens and they don't really talk to each other and they're not incentivized to talk to each other. But actually, if you set up your Meta Conversions API, it actually uses the GTM to pull all the data through into your GA4, right? And it's really helpful. If you're doing paid social ads, you're probably already doing that. If you're not, get that set up. And then I would recommend, you can't, Google Analytics 4 has everything in there, but you can't necessarily get it all out in the way you want. So if you haven't already, I would get that connected to Google BigQuery, then get yourself a Google BigQuery setup so you can see all that data. But then also what is actually happening on the customer side. So whether you're collecting leads, get your HubSpot data in there. If you're on Shopify, get all that in there as well. And then you can have all your data in one place, and then you can start trying to understand what happened and what didn't happen. Or you can ask some people, clever people, to help you. So what impact can this have on your business, and how can it help you unlock more customers, more money, more budget? So this was another example, and we're going to go through some of the maths. So all the different visits we took before, the time, these are all things that we need to look at. So we have a model called the Sims attribution model, and we look at all the different scenarios. So we basically help you get all your data into one place. We then look at it all and go through. And at the moment, we do all of this with clever people. I don't believe there is an out-of-the-box attribution model that is fit for purpose for all businesses. Right? I just don't. Rosie hasn't invented it yet, so we're not there. But we are looking at how can we do that. But because all your businesses are different with products, different customers, different journeys, I think there needs to be something specific for your business, right, to help you and your business make better decisions. So I'm not going to go through all of this because that would be really boring. But I suppose it's important to understand. What we normally do is look at all the different touch points for all your different transactions and get into this, and then we strip out direct, and then we start seeing, well, what impact will that have on the credit for the different channels? Okay, so you then have some channels that are winners and get more budget and have a better RoAS, and then you have some channels that are losers and they get less recognition and less RoAS. So in this scenario, you can see that affiliates are getting impacted a little bit more. And we sort of go through and say, well, is this a fair representation of what we're trying to get to? And in this scenario, the biggest loser is affiliates. Whichever model you look at, affiliates are going to... So the affiliate team, then, or your affiliate partners can be, well, that's not fair. All right? I'm a big fan of affiliates. I think there is a place for affiliates, as long as it's set up correctly, managed correctly, and they're not just goal hangers. But some people will have different views on that, but the data would imply that they are a goal hanger and that they need to be recognised differently. Okay, so we're not going to necessarily change how much we spend, but we're going to change how much we recognise the channel. But we're going to give some more money to Performance Max, and actually email's a superstar, right? We need to give some more credit in this scenario to email. So you then might go up to the board. What we're not going to do is go talk to the board about 9 different models, because that's going to really blow their mind. We might go with 3. Or you might say, we want to go and explain this one, this model here. So 60% first click, 15% spread evenly across all the other clicks, less direct, and then 25% on the last click. That's maybe a nice model that works for your business. And then this is how you'd then graph it and look at it and go, right, here's what we're doing. Affiliates down, email up, performance max up a bit, and then you pick a model. And this is something you only need to do once. Everybody goes, oh, isn't this going to be hard? Doesn't it need to be in a platform and always on? You do need to do it once, right? Or once a year to check that it's right. And then you need to then change and learn what impact does that have on our RoAS, and then how do we now report on that? Right, so you need to have a system where you can actually report on a different set of numbers and also use that in your optimization. Right, so if you can change how you're recognizing a channel and then load that into the team who can then optimize with those new numbers, that's like double bubble. That's really, really helpful. So here's then what the RoAS changes would be, and if we took those models. Right, so no more spreadsheets. But overall, you can start seeing what the channel mix is and how many, 37% of conversions have more than one step. Right, so that's an interesting thing. Should we, and then also, if you're then going to go into experimentation or testing, you can then start saying, well, what happens if we start spending more in Facebook, or what happens if we start investing more in brand? So there's your sort of upper funnel. And then what's the conversation we need to have around affiliates? Where does that really fit in? Should we do some incrementality testing on affiliates? I was talking to someone about at dinner last night, and the only way to do a lot of this testing is turn half the country off for a long period of time and then keep half on. Everybody gets scared by that. It's like, should I be bidding on my brand? Well, that's like the big question. Should you or shouldn't you? Well, you've got to turn half the country off and then have some data to be able to answer that. But here's an example. We've got the permission of this customer to share this. They use a 40-20-40 model, 40% first click, 20% split over the rest of the clicks, excluding direct, and then 40% last non-direct click. And it enabled them to move from last click to have 41% increase in ability to spend, right? So they maintained the same RoAS, but it unlocked more money, right? So, and it massively grew all their ability to go after more keywords that traditionally were seen as too expensive. A lot of the generic keywords where people said, oh, it's too expensive, can't afford to bid on that, doesn't get the right RoAS. Well, actually, now we've reorganized the numbers, we get a better RoAS. And then we could go after them and increase sales. And they sold. Has anybody heard of Pavers? Yeah. They tend to be, it's comfy shoes for older people. We've got the wrong demographic in here, really. But they're massive. They sell a lot. I can't believe how many people were buying slippers all the time. It just can't make enough slippers. Right, so this is what we want to do, right? We want to unlock more RoAS, right? So if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, you have to watch Ted Lasso. It's the happiest film ever. Right, so a few key takeaways before we go for some coffee. Get your GA4 data connected to BigQuery. That's just a good thing. Has everybody connected their Universal Analytics to GA4 before it got switched off? Because we speak to people, can you help me get my Universal Analytics data back? And I'm like, no. Sorry, you should have done that before. Did you not read the blog about that? The next question is, do you actually need a model? Right? It may be a problem that's not going to have a big enough impact on your business, so you might not need a model. Right? And you should start thinking about, and you could just do that in GA4, how many steps are there that we can actually see? Going to do into BigQuery, how many steps are there now that we've got everything connected and bits we couldn't see before? This is the key one, right? We're going to change how we recognize the return on our budgets. Is everybody on board with that? Right? Because if you don't get that buy-in, don't even bother looking at the rest of it, okay? Have a look at lots of different multiple models that work best for your business and what's the impact for the different channels, different teams, different agency relationships, because it changes a lot of things. I was joking last night with someone when we were working with Argos and they were missing their numbers on Black Friday, and what would happen is the PPC team would just switch on the term Argos and then the organic guy would run down the corridor going, what are you doing? Right? Because they had a don't bid on the brand term, but he was like, I'm missing my PPC numbers, I'm just going to bid on brand. And then you need to implement take all of this to change how you optimize or you work with your agency to optimize, and then how's that going to affect your reporting? So, I'm John Redman. Thank you very much for having me. That's me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. I should have put the charity donation up there.
Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere because I'm sure there's going to be questions. One of the reasons that I asked John to come and talk today, and by the way, I would really love it if by the end of today we could try and get up to £600 to sponsor a child. That would be amazing. Let's at least try.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I invited John up here is that, as I've said, we've been doing PPC for 12 years. And one of the biggest things that you have with your relationship with your client is trust. And when the data starts to go wonky and you have all of these changes of Universal Analytics to GA4, consent mode, when you have cookie banners, the data starts to look different and the trust starts to get eroded. And our data team, which are a tagging team experts, but also are trying to help you tell the stories while you saw that complexity, trying to hook you up with BigQuery, trying to make sure that you've got the best quality data. That trust is a really difficult thing. So John has beautifully explained this is complicated, people, and that's why we need to kind of understand it more and care more about our data. So, any questions? Lots of questions. We've got Abby over there.
Might give Rosie the mic, she can answer them.
Hi, it's a two-part question. Would you expect to see your attribution model change over time? And then, based on the concept of like picking a model, if you are a brand with multiple sales channels, i.e. wholesale trade, D2C, would you expect a different attribution model for each of those
So I'll answer
channels?
the second question first. Yes, you'll have different attribution models for your different. So if you're selling direct to consumer, or if you're selling through wholesale, you need to look at those in isolation. And then going back to the first question, it really depends on how if you change your product pricing and proposition. So if you start changing how you're marketing, we would recommending updating it maybe annually and looking at it. Again, if you get really into all of this sort of thing, you could then start looking at all your customer data and going, right, well, who are our most valuable customers? What do they look like? What did they buy first? Did they buy in a sale? Right? How many things have they bought over the last 3 years?
Yeah, customer lifetime
Yeah,
value.
all of that. If you start understanding this, you can then start understanding that, and then which attribution model gets us the most valuable first big customers, right? So the answer is yes, I'd revisit it annually, but it's not something you need to do every month, right? I don't think, unless you're massively changing your business, and then I would wait, change the business, and then get enough data and look at it. We normally say you need several thousands of transactions and customer touch points to be able to form something useful. Ideally, which doesn't exist in many retailers, in a flat trading period where you're not in and out of sale every day, right? Because that is going to affect people's behaviour. But we can model that, and we can strip out sale, and we can strip out if it's over a certain % discount. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. We're actually mid-replatform, and we're thinking a lot about what post-replatform looks like. And as part of that replatform, we're bringing in a lot of new channels that I'm relatively new to the business, but there's a lot of channels that we completely ignored, and we're bringing them in now as part of.
So if you're moving to a new platform and you're doing new channels, I would wait until you've got enough data.
That's what's in my head.
Yeah, I'd wait until you've got enough data, because otherwise you're going to be looking at the world based on what the old platform did and an old set of channels, and making incorrect assumptions about what might happen.
Yeah, and the fact that none of our data was originally built correctly, we've had to rewrite and rebuild, as these guys well know, we've had to rewrite all of our data because none of it was done.
And going back to Ian's point before, it's a bit like crap in, crap out. And it really is, though, isn't it? Sorry,
Beautifully put.
Oh, sorry, take the lad out of Leeds. But it's all about the quality of the data. Yeah. So.
Because that's the other thing, is this isn't going to be all of the data. The people who are completely dark, and dark social, like this isn't all of the data. If your customers are shopping on channels, you can still be there even if you can't prove the return on investment, because there's still going to be a value to being there. So like being a data-led marketeer is really important, but also don't forget to be where your customers are and mean something to them.
And I think the conversation we often have is, because this is all, find more RoAS, this, that, and the other, but it's like, well, what's actually the value of an impression? Years ago, it was all about CPM. Right, we used to talk about the value of an impression. Nobody really talks about that. But actually, what's the value of an impression on Facebook? Could you just take total impressions on Facebook, total revenue driven by Facebook, right, that's the value of an impression on Facebook, right, so let's go and optimize to that value, right? So it's looking at the metrics and the numbers in a different way.
But there was another question up over here, I think.
Thanks a lot. It was great. That was a really good talk. Thank you. So
Thank you.
eloquently put. Excuse me. So I lead marketing for two very different businesses. So one business has every product it sells is different, is unique. It sells to 20 customers in a year. Each one is probably from £500,000 to £3 million. The other business sells things from £10 to £30 to tens of thousands of customers. Which one is more in need of an attribution model?
The one with the big transaction volume, not big transaction. You could probably just pick up the phone and ask the ones on the other one. We're doing this because we don't want to phone everybody up. Right? But if you're doing 20 transactions, I'd just take them out for lunch.
So sadly, given who they are, I'd love to be able to do that, but I can't necessarily do it. The other point that you just made, which was very interesting, was about people's focus on disregarding impressions. And for that business which is only selling to a few customers, that is a particularly interesting point because of the value of that currency in relation to being seen, even if you cannot connect being seen to the direct transaction itself.
Yeah.
But how to get a better understanding of that relationship, even though you can't see the direct connection, is there a way of even thinking about how you might do that?
There'll be some tests and studies or other evidence you could cite. But if we go back to TV, when there was 3 channels, I'm old enough to remember when there was only 3 channels, got excited when the 4th came along, and you were that Saturday night TV, that's the most valuable slot, or when the FA Cup final's on or whatever, and there was no way of measuring really. People said they had the set-top boxes with the measurement on, but it was, were they making a cup of tea, were they, so, and we're sort of almost going back to that level of actually brand visibility. So you can do brand visibility, brand recall studies, but again, that's quite a manual or data-driven process. There's lots of companies out there that can go, right, brand recall study. But I think we need to be thinking about how much a pair of eyeballs worth on our brand and our message, as well as just looking at the till.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.